Okay, we're going to talk test deployment options in Blackboard. So let's just briefly go over what we're going to talk about. First, some simple starting assumptions as to what you'd need to do before deploying a test. And then we're going to talk in detail about test deployment options themselves. And then finally, talk a bit about the sort of environment a student should have to take tests in. And some of that will hinge on what deployment options you've selected for your test. Okay, so first of all, the starting assumptions I'm making is that you already have a test in your Blackboard course, whether that means that you went under course tools on your control panel down to test surveys and pools and into the tests manager and made one yourself, or if you got a test from a publisher or whatever. Bottom line is you have a test already in your test manager. Okay, so at this point, I'm just going to jump out straight to the test options page for when you're actually deploying a test, and we'll go from there. Well, as you probably know, to add a new test deployment, you'd go into one of your content areas, and on the Create Assessment menu, just choose Test. Now it's going to ask you which test, and it will show you a list of all of the tests in your course that have not already been deployed. So if you wanted to modify the test options of something that's already deployed, you'd need to go find that link to the test, and on its context menu, choose Edit the Test Options instead of making a new link to it. In this case, I'm going to pick the demonstration test that I have in this course, and then say Submit. Now, technically, I have already deployed the test, but it's going to default to not being available for students to see, so it doesn't matter that the link is there. But what that would mean is if I left right now, like hit cancel and went away, when I came back, I would see a link to the test that's simply not available to students. Okay. First of all, you can change the name of the test when you deploy it. I generally recommend against this because sometimes students will end up thinking of the test in terms of what the link they clicked says, but if you change the name to say something else here, then it's going to be different than what they see in the Student My Grade list. So, in my opinion at least, it's best to keep names consistent. Okay, if I'd filled in a description on this test, which I did not, it would have put the text here, and you can change that if you want. So if you'd set up a description originally when you built the test, it would be just fine to modify it at this point. Certainly not a problem. And then there's this option right below the description box for do you want to open the test in a new window? Frankly, no you don't, not unless you have some really strong reason for wanting it to. And you don't have such a reason, so just don't do it. Okay, let's get down into some of the real meat of making a test available, deploying it to the students. The first option, do you want the link to be available? Well, even if what you're saying to yourself is, well, no, I don't want it right now, I want it to appear sometime in the future, you still want to choose yes. If you leave this at no, students will never see the link, regardless of what you might set down here on the display after and display until controls, okay? We'll get to those in a moment. So you will want to make the link available. Do you want to add a new announcement for this test? No, you don't, and here's why. The announcement that it generates, you can't control what it says, other than go and edit it later. So you're going to be posting an announcement that just has some default text that, frankly, doesn't make a lot of sense, and it will appear in your course immediately, rather than waiting until the link actually becomes available to students. So again, if you were setting a display after date, and you said yes to make an announcement, it would post the announcement now, even though the link wouldn't show up for students. So, no. If you really want to announce your test, go and post an announcement using the announcements tool when you're ready for it. And then you can actually say what you want to say about it as well. Alright, well, these are tests, so of course you only get one shot at it, right? Well, no. There is an option to allow students to have multiple attempts at your test. If you do not check this box, students will get only one attempt, okay? So not checking it is probably the most expected behavior. But if you check this box, the default behavior there is to allow unlimited attempts. And that means a student could take the test, well, an infinite number of times if they wanted to try. You might want to use something like that if you intend students to keep taking the test until they have a perfect score, for example, or until they meet some certain level of success in the test. Now, some people might say, well, aren't the students just going to memorize what the questions and answers are through multiple attempts, and then they'll get a perfect score pretty quickly? Well, yeah, but sometimes that's exactly the point. And also, if you just wanted to use this testing tool as a tutorial sort of a function rather than an actual evaluation for a grade, the unlimited attempts might be a really good choice. The other option you have for allowing multiple attempts is to specify how many attempts a student gets. So uncheck that box, they get only one attempt. Check it, and then you can specify how many attempts they get. So a student could take this test up to 3 times if I set it this way. All right? But in my case, I'm just going to go with the classic form of only 1 attempt at my test. Okay. Force completion. The text here, once started, this test must be completed in 1 sitting. You do not want to use force completion. You might think you do, but you're wrong. The way force completion works is when a student begins a test attempt, then if anything happens to make them leave the test, they will not be able to get back into their attempt. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's exactly what I want. No, it isn't really. Trust me on this. If they're sitting at home and someone accidentally disconnects them from the internet, or if their browser crashes, then they'll get that problem resolved probably quite quickly, and they'll try to get back into their test, and they won't be able to. And then they will need to figure out what to do, which will probably mean contacting you and asking you to deal with it. And your choices would be either give them some grade on whatever part of the test they already finished, or clear their attempt and let them take it all over again. And you might not want to do either of those things. Plus, it does require you to manually intervene, which you also likely don't want to do. So force completion is a big negatory, all right? Setting the timer. Timed tests are kind of a useful thing. The controls for setting the timer are not as great as I would wish. When you check the box to set the timer, it defaults to a 1-hour time limit. You can set that to as low as 0 hours and 0 minutes, or as much as 4 hours and 60 minutes. Okay. No one in their right mind is going to set a test timer of 5 hours. It would work technically, but it would be a horrible experience for the students. If you really have tests that need to run for like 5 hours to complete it, break it up into multiple tests, please, for heaven's sake. Your students will really appreciate it. In fact, going over 3 hours is probably going to run some technical risks for you of disconnections and things with students. So in this case, I'm going to have perhaps like a 20-minute time limit on this test, but I'm going to leave the timer on. Now, unfortunately, you are limited to 5-minute increments, so there's no way to do like a 2-minute test, or not to set a time limit that way. When you do a timer on the test, it will show you for each individual student's attempt how long they spent on the test. So even if they don't go past your time limit, you'll still be able to know how long they spent taking the test. So that might be one strategy if you're just starting out with some of your electronic testing. Maybe set a time limit that's fairly long, and then even if no one goes over the time limit, go in and spot check a few student attempts to get a feel for how long they're really taking. Anyway, that's how the timer part of it works. And then there will be a little status indicator in there where it'll warn them before the test gets to the time limit. That sort of thing happens. Now, corollary to setting the timer in the first place is this function called auto submit. Now, there's 2 settings, off and on. Off is the default, and what that will do is when the student hits that time limit, they'll get a prompt for telling them they've hit the time limit and do they want to submit their work. Okay, so maybe the classroom analog of this would be walking over to the student's desk and looking down and saying, time's up, do you want to turn in your paper? And then they can say yes or no, and you could let them keep on taking the test. The other option, if you turn auto submit on, is that when that time limit is reached, it just picks up the paper. It doesn't ask them, it just says, hey, you're submitting your work now. And what that will give you is only the work they were able to complete within the time limit that you set. Now, there's one caveat to this. I mean, it sounds on the surface like it'd be great. Make sure no student goes over the time limit. You'll know how much they did in that amount of time. And that really is good unless you have students who are entitled to more than the normal time limit. You know, there's some students who need special consideration. They get like time and a half to take their tests and things. If you have students that fall into that category, you do not want to turn auto submit on, because there is not a way, at least not right now, to make Blackboard give an exception for individual students. This is all or nothing on this test link, okay? So in those cases, you'd want to leave it at off, which would then prompt students when the time limit comes up, and then the students who are entitled to more time could simply say that they don't want to submit and keep on taking it. Of course, the students who don't get special extra time would have the same option, and then they would be over the time limit. Now, what happens if students take that opportunity to go past the time limit is their test attempt will show up as needing grading. So you can go under the Grade Center in your control panel to Needs Grading, and you'll see those test attempts that have that little green icon on them for Needs Grading. And then you can look at those individual attempts and decide what you want to do with them. In the case of a student who goes, 5 seconds past the time limit, maybe you actually want to give them full credit. But the student who spent 2 hours taking a 20-minute test, maybe you just want to give a 0 to. It's all up to you at that point as to how you want to manually handle it. Okay, now we're talking about these controls here, display after and display until. They have nothing to do with the timer. They're totally independent. I kind of wish they didn't come in this order on the screen, because often people will think they're related to this. Really, they should be up here next to making the link available, in my opinion. Okay, the way this works is the display after is the date and time at which you want the link to the test to appear. Display until is when you want that link to disappear. Now, that's separate from when students can take the test. So if a student could see the link, so it is already displaying, and then they click to start taking a test, and then the display until time comes, they can keep taking the test. That does not end the sessions already in progress. It just removes the link to take the test, okay? The way this would work is if I wanted this to display after, I'd check the box, and I could pick some time in the future and some time of that day, such as like 9 in the morning. Okay, so here I've set up display after on the 15th starting at 9 a.m. And let's say I want to leave this link up for a week. So I could go the 22nd and also pick 9 a.m. Okay, so you can do that sort of thing. Now, it is possible to set the date and time and then uncheck the box. If you do that, it will ignore the date and time, okay? So you have to have those boxes checked for this stuff that you enter here to even take effect, okay? Or if you leave the boxes blank, what's going to happen is as soon as you hit submit on this screen, the test link will appear and it'll just be there indefinitely, okay? All right, there is also an opportunity to set a password on a test. There might be some situations where this would be useful, but by and large it really isn't. What you would do is actually type in whatever you want the password to be, and of course make sure the box is checked. And then when students go to take the test, they would be prompted to enter the password, which does mean you'll have to tell them the password. So this could be useful if you wanted to have a test during a class session and you only wanted students who showed up to take it. You could just write the password on the board at the front of the room. they could take the test with that password, and people who weren't in class would not know what the password was, you know, unless they actually got a text message from a student in the class telling them or something like that, okay? So password is not all that great a control. Useful if you absolutely need it, but for most people, not necessary. Now that's the meat of how you're going to be making it available, the primary parameters of test availability. We'll talk about the due date very briefly here. If you set this, then your test will show up in the to-do module and be something that students get some level of reminder of automatically, but there's certainly no need to set a due date if you're not already using other due dates on other entries in your grade center. There are some options, the self-assessment options here, for how the grades are going to show up for the instructor for the work that the students do. The default behavior is to include the test in grade center calculations. Chances are that's what you want, but if you don't want the student work to be added to like your total column, you could uncheck that box, okay? Most of the time you'll leave it on. That's why it defaults to being on. Now, you also have a choice to hide those results from the test so that you never even see a column for them in the grade center. If you check this box, you obviously can't have the test included in the grade center calculations because it won't have a grade center entry at all. So you might want to use this choice if what you're setting up is not really an evaluative test, but a tutorial, so that students could take it as many times as they want maybe, and you don't even have to know what they got on it. But, yeah, all right, it's warning me about unchecking this. Normally, you'd want to leave these at the defaults if it's a test where the score from the student actually matters. All right, moving on down here to test feedback. There's 4 things that can be shown to a student after they finish the test. By default, score is checked. Doesn't have to be. In this case, when a student submitted their test, they would see nothing about it. In this case, they would be able to see the score. In this case, they'd be able to see what answers they gave and the question text. So if you don't want students to see the questions until after the test-taking period is over, you'd want to leave all of these other ones unchecked. This one would show the question text and what the correct answer should be. Often those are both checked so they can see what they should have put as well as what they did put. And then if you've set feedback on the questions, you'd want that box checked, or else the feedback actually won't show up for students. Okay? And you can always come back to this and change these after your test taking period is over. All right, last section here. Hey, we're almost done. Presentation mode. All at once is the default, and that gives you a single screen that students would just scroll down and all the questions are on the screen. This is what a lot of people think of when they think an online test. What it's going to give you is just the one page, so it's easy to scroll up and down and jump between questions. So if what you're doing is one of those questions where you encourage students to race through and answer the ones they know and then go back and answer the ones they didn't know, an all-at-once format might just be exactly what you want. The other option is the one-at-a-time format, which gives them one question on the screen, and when they answer it, then they click a button to move on to the next question, or the previous question if they're halfway through the test or something. Now you can actually prevent them from going backwards in the test, and that might matter if, say, the question text for question 3 actually gives the answer to question 1. You could prevent them from being able to go back to question 1 by prohibiting backtracking. Okay, but that only matters on the one at a time because the all at once they could just scroll up. Okay, technically speaking, the one at a time is going to make it a little bit easier to offer long tests because the student is constantly interacting with our system as they advance through questions. So they're not going to have like timeout problems. But if it's a short test like this one where I was suggesting 20 minutes, I'd probably do it all at once. Just depends on exactly what you want to achieve with your test. All right, last option on the page, randomized questions. It's a checkbox. If you check this, each student that takes the test is going to see the questions in a different order. It's going to give them all the same questions unless you've built your test to like draw random questions from question pools or something. But it's just going to reorder them. So it's a pretty simple way to make it so that at least students can't say, hey, what'd you put for number 2? Because that'll be meaningless. All right, and it's just one checkbox simple, so that's pretty good. Then when you submit this, it will put the link in the course, make it available to students if you set it to, and then students can take the test based on all these criteria that you set up. Okay, so that's the meat and potatoes of actually deploying a test. So let's talk a little bit about what I'd consider the most important ones from that selection, all right? First of all, yes, you are going to want to make the link available. That is true even if you are setting the display after and display until settings, because if you leave the control set to make the link available no, it doesn't matter what dates and times you set. The link will still be unavailable, okay? So make that link available is yes. Force completion, that is a big no. Instructors checking the force completion box are probably the #1 cause of test-taking problems among students, because any little interruption between the student and the test attempt means they're locked out and they can't finish. Whereas if you leave force completion to no and not check that box, then if students do have a technical interruption, they'll be able to get right back into the same test attempt. Okay? And then finally, just something to bear in mind is that you can set up a test initially so that the feedback is only showing the score or even showing nothing at all if you wanted to, and leave it that way while students take the test. And then you could go back in after the test period concluded, and you could check more of those feedback checkboxes to show the score, the questions themselves and what students put, what the correct answers should be, and even enabling the feedback on those questions if there's any set. And then if students want to see that more detailed view once you've allowed it, they can go into their student My Grade list and actually click on the score they earned on the test, and they'll see all of their attempt, and depending on what you check, they'll see a lot more data. Okay, so that's the most important takeaways from test deployment options. Now, I said I was going to talk a little about the student test environment, and really there's just a few key points that I think are worth emphasizing here. And frankly, I think most of them are common sense, but it's amazing how often students apparently disagree. So, first of all, students should make time to take their tests, okay? And that doesn't just mean, oh, I am going to have 5 minutes to take my 2-hour final exam. No, that just doesn't work. They need to set aside a time and actually be taking the test. Which leads right into the second point of not trying to multitask. It's depressing to me how many calls I've taken where the student is saying something like, oh, I had a problem taking my test, and I was trying to watch my 4-year-old at the same time and also wash the dishes. And no, I mean, you don't do that in the classroom environment. You don't try to watch your kids while you take a test in class, so why would you just because it's online? So no multitasking. This one surprises a lot of students when we at Tech Support mention it, and that's to use a wired network connection as opposed to a wireless signal. A lot of people these days are used to just having their Wi-Fi working in their homes, and so they'll, grab their laptop and they'll go sit in the easy chair in the middle of the living room, and they'll, go try to take their test in that environment. And, a lot of times that works just fine, but wireless network is, it's just radio signals, so things can interrupt that. Even things as simple as like someone turned on the microwave, and if it's just the wrong frequency at that time, you're going to lose your network connection for a little while. And if that compounds with someone actually having force completion turned on, that means they're locked out of their test attempt, and they'd need to get someone to clear it, or just not be able to finish their test. Okay, so whenever possible, it is best to take a test on a computer that's actually plugged into a wire connecting to the internet. All right, when you take a test in Blackboard, there's that first screen when you click the name of the test that's in the content area, and it takes you to a screen telling you about the test, and there's a begin button, okay? Before hitting begin, students should actually make sure they're ready. They oughtn't to hit begin and then go use the restroom and come back, or decide that they're going to do their taxes right then, or anything like that, okay? They need to be ready to take the test before they hit that begin button. That's especially important if it's a timed test, because once they hit begin, that's when the timer starts. And even if they were to leave the test session and come back to it again, that timer would still be ticking. So, it's best if they just get ready before they start rather than after, okay? And then really, this is a point that those of us in tech support really want emphasized, and that's that the first thing students should do if they're having a problem with their test is to contact you guys, the instructors, and describe what their problem is to you. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't also contact technical support if they're having a real technical problem, but at the very least, they need to contact the instructor so that there's some sort of document about the fact that they're having a problem, so that you can decide whether or not to let them retake the test or give them another attempt or whatever you decide to do about it. And sometimes we'll get students who just contact technical support and say, oh, I got locked out of my test and I can't finish it, and I want to get some help, and they'll send this at, like Friday at 7 p.m. when there's no one here until Monday, and then they wait all weekend and not even say anything to their instructor, and that's just ridiculous, okay? So one of the things that I would strongly encourage you to tell your students is that if they have a problem while taking one of your tests, contact you first. And then you're more than welcome, if it seems to be a purely technical problem, to either tell them to contact us at our help desk system, or just, get in touch with us yourselves about whatever the problem is. All right? Okay, so that's what I had to say about students taking tests and about test deployment options in general. So thank you for going through all this.